With the opening rounds of the season out of the way and the F1 grid headed for its Australasian and Asian leg, or the first one at least, talk of upgrades is starting to brew. Normally, this battle doesn't begin until the European races start, but with that not being till round 7, the teams are shipping their parts halfway round the world to try and get an edge on the competition. Even when F1 does make it to Europe, Imola and Monaco are waiting for them, which are two tracks at such extremes of the spectrum that fitting long-lasting upgrades is a huge challenge. So, with the Australian Grand Prix in 2 weekends' time, followed by Japan and China, we're going to check out what we might be seeing added to each car in the coming rounds. First up is McLaren, who've been making a massive song and dance about their upcoming upgrade package, though you might have missed that due to the 24-hour coverage of speculative Red Bull rumours. McLaren was always more optimistic for the second round of 2024 than the opener in Bahrain. The MCL38 proved to be more at ease on the Jeddah track, finishing P4 with Piastri and gaining a position compared to Bahrain. McLaren capitalised on a very underwhelming Mercedes that suffered from significant problems at high speeds. Lando Norris's 8th position is misleading. He was too close behind Piastri during the early safety car, and the team didn't want to double stack and leave Lando sat still for a few seconds while the rest of the field passed him in the pit lane. So he stayed out, gaining track position and praying for another safety car or red flag, which never came. The advantage for McLaren in terms of race pace compared to the W15 and the Aston Martin AMR24 was around a tenth and a half. However, the Ferrari was 3 tenths away and the Red Bull of Max Verstappen around 7 tenths. McLaren's early pace advantage has allowed them to take third in the Constructors' Championship off their engine supplier Mercedes. After the race at Jeddah, Andrea Stella, the team principal of the Woking team, went into more detail about the strengths of his car. Our strengths and weaknesses were shown very well on this circuit. Starting from the strengths, you'll have seen that in the first sector, everyone was losing ground to us. This is because in fast corners, where you just need to give a single steering wheel input, our car responds very well, said the Italian engineer. In the corners where you need to spend a lot of time on the steering, we're not yet as competitive as we would like. It was pretty obvious just how good that McLaren was in the meandering first sector in Jeddah, where the drivers are foot to the floor and the corners are more of an inconvenience than anything else. Lando Norris was pulling a second ahead of Lewis Hamilton as he comfortably kept the 7-time champion behind him throughout the Grand Prix. For a car that is so good in high-speed corners though, the McLaren is ironically awful in a drag race, especially with its DRS open. McLaren lost as much as 4 tenths on a qualifying lap, a gap that cost Piastri and Norris P2 and P3 on the grid. This limitation created considerable problems for Piastri in the race, as he failed to overtake Lewis Hamilton's W15 before he eventually gave up and just settled in behind him, waiting for the Briton to pit. How McLaren prioritises their upgrades will be a challenge for the team. The need to find both straight-line speed, something that will be vital come Imola in mid-May, and slower corner stability, a must for Monaco at the end of May. Solving their straight-line speed should be the first priority and could be what we see in the coming races. Australia, Japan and China are all places where straight-line speed can go a long way to help make overtakes happen and defend against them. Round 6 in Miami is then the likely location of any upgrades that help in the tighter turns, of which the Hard Rock Stadium's car park has many. McLaren's car is mostly a continuation of 2023's, unlike the handful of teams who have done a complete overhaul. So in terms of gains to be found from finding the perfect setup, Andrea Stella said, "I think there's still a little bit of margin to understand our car, but it'll be worth a tenth at most. Instead, the team will need to rely on their factory to find performance through upgrades. We have some small changes coming to Australia and hopefully Japan, but they'll only be worth a few milliseconds. Then, within the first third of the season, we'll have an important update," explained the Italian team principal. Miami or Imola are the most likely events where the first substantial updates will be introduced. The American track will host the second sprint race of the year, with the first to be held in China. Last year, it was only Lando Norris who received the upgraded car in Austria. Piastri received the improvements thereafter. It's frustrating for McLaren that they're having to wait for this performance again. It isn't as bad as last year when they struggled for points, but if they want to become championship contenders in the future, they can't continue to give up ground early in the season. McLaren's direct rivals, or at least the team they're trying to catch with their upgrades, is obviously Ferrari, but they have a huge package in the works themselves. As Red Bull's closest challenger, and I say closest in the loosest possible way, everyone will be looking to them to make improvements and provide some form of challenge to Verstappen as the season progresses. However, Leclerc says they'll have to focus on optimizing their existing car for the time being, while waiting for developments to arrive. "I don't think we'll have many things new in Melbourne," said Leclerc, "but I think we're doing a good job by maximizing our package at the moment." So that's where we are. I think we'll probably have to wait and see whenever we have new parts to the car, what kind of step we do forward. Hopefully that will bring us closer to Red Bull. He believes that the team's biggest deficit to Red Bull last weekend occurred early in stints, as their SF24 couldn't make its tyres work as successfully straight out of the pits. That is a big swing from last season, where the problem was the exact opposite. They turned on their tyres so quickly that they were done after a handful of laps. "I don't think tyre degradation was a thing, it was more about tyre warm-up, and we struggled a bit more to bring them to the right temperature in order to push," he explained. Clearly, the winter work to try and solve that tyre problem has worked a treat. In the first race, Carlos Sainz confirmed an improvement of 4/10 relative to Red Bull compared to 12 months ago. However, there is still a long way to go. Luckily, there's a new and heavily revised aero package in the works at the moment. This will include new side pods and a new floor, and with the tyre problems mostly solved, the team will be focused on strapping on as much raw lap time as possible. A large focus for those new side pods will be replicating a trend that Red Bull have started. With a tiny inlet in the side pod for air to travel into the engine cooling system, the RB20 shocked many people. But with engine cooling technology rapidly advancing at the moment, other teams are going to follow suit. The team have described the upgrades, which could go far enough to be described as a B-spec car, as being an extreme version of their current car. While Ferrari do have plenty in the pipeline, Red Bull will not be sitting still. The team have been dominating the headlines with off-track drama, and on track they've been dominating races. They shocked the F1 world with their skinny side pod design and thick shoulders, which took inspiration from the failed W13 and 14. The team are targeting round 4 in Japan as the site of their first big upgrade package, and if reports are to be believed, it will borrow even more from the designs that Mercedes abandoned. Autosport reported back in February that Red Bull were developing a side pod that is an even closer match to the Mercedes Zero pod. It's now believed that those new side pods will make an appearance in Japan. The opening 3 rounds of the season, on the Arabian Peninsula and then in Australia, are all very hot, meaning teams have to make more allowances for engine cooling, but once they get to Japan, that's far less of a worry. The current Red Bull Aero concept, based on what we can actually see, is aimed at channeling as much air as possible in between the rear wheels and over the rear end performance critical parts. Those big side pod undercuts aim to channel everything toward the beam wing and where the diffuser expels air, as do the big cannon-like shoulders with their deep channel that carries air to the rear wing and beam wing. If they do slim down those side pods further, it'll be interesting to see how they maintain that undercut that does so much work for them, or if they'll achieve the same effect in a completely different way. While the early rounds may have been dominated by Red Bull, Ferrari and McLaren are working on closing that gap, and hopefully in the coming rounds, we can start to see some real challenge coming from the rest of the grid. Who are you expecting to out-upgrade Red Bull in the coming races? Or do you think it's going to be impossible at this point? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.